My journey from struggling to fluency. Hello, everyone. Today I want to share my personal journey of learning English, how I struggled, what worked, and how you can do it too. This isn't just another language learning guide. It's my story, filled with real challenges, practical solutions, and the mindset shifts that helped me become fluent. Learning a new language is never easy, and English, with its complex grammar, tricky pronunciation, and countless idioms, can feel overwhelming. But trust me, if I can do it, so can you. When I first started, I had no idea where to begin. I felt lost, insecure, and frustrated. I made countless mistakes, doubted myself over and over, and even considered giving up. But through perseverance, trial and error, and a few game-changing strategies, I finally cracked the code. In this video, I'm going to take you through every stage of my English learning journey, the early struggles, the breakthrough moments, and the methods that transform my skills. I'll share the mistakes I made, the lessons I learned, and the secrets that helped me go from a nervous learner to a confident English speaker. My goal is simple: to inspire you, guide you, and give you the motivation to keep going, because your dream of speaking fluent English is absolutely possible. So grab a notebook, get comfortable, and let's dive into my English learning story. By the end of this video, I hope you'll walk away feeling encouraged and ready to take action. Let's begin. The beginning. My English struggles. I wasn't always fluent in English. In fact, there was a time when even basic conversations made me nervous. I remember sitting in an English class, trying to memorize vocabulary lists and grammar rules, but whenever I tried to speak, my mind went blank. Sound familiar? At school, English was just another subject to pass. We focused on writing essays and grammar exercises, but speaking, that was rarely practiced. The textbooks were filled with complicated grammar explanations and long vocabulary lists, but real conversations, they were almost non-existent. Whenever I had to speak in front of the class, my heart pounded, and I could barely form a sentence without stuttering. I felt frustrated. Why was it so hard? I saw other students who seemed to speak effortlessly, and I wondered if I just didn't have the talent for learning languages. My teachers emphasized getting good grades on written exams, so I memorized grammar rules, aced my tests, and still felt completely lost when it came to real-world conversations. The worst moment came when I had to talk to a foreigner for the first time. I was in a store when a tourist asked for directions. My brain understood what he said, but my mouth refused to cooperate. I stood there, trying to translate words in my head, but by the time I figured out what to say, he had already walked away. I felt so embarrassed. It wasn't just that I didn't know how to answer. It was the overwhelming anxiety that paralyzed me. That moment stuck with me for weeks. I replayed the situation in my head over and over, wishing I had done something differently. It wasn't just that one situation. Every time I encountered an opportunity to speak English, I hesitated. I avoided conversations with native speakers. I let my fear of making mistakes stop me from even trying. The more I avoided speaking, the worse my confidence became. I started to believe that maybe I would never be good at English. I remember sitting in my room one evening, feeling frustrated and hopeless. Why is this so difficult? I thought. Why can't I just speak like everyone else? But then something changed. That was the turning point. I knew I had to find a better way to learn English. I realized that something had to change, but I didn't know where to start. I searched online, read countless how to learn English guides, and tried different methods. Some worked, some didn't. But what mattered most was that I finally took action. And that's where my real English learning journey began. I stopped thinking of English as just another subject and started seeing it as a skill to be developed. I knew I wouldn't become fluent overnight, but I promised myself one thing: I would never let fear stop me from trying again. What didn't work? The common mistakes I made. Like many learners, I made mistakes that slowed down my progress. I thought I was studying the right way, but in reality, I was wasting time on ineffective methods. Looking back, I now realize that I could have saved months, even years of frustration if I had known what truly worked. Here are some of the biggest mistakes I made. Focusing too much on grammar. I spent hours learning complicated grammar rules and doing exercises, thinking this would help me speak fluently. But when it came time to have a conversation, I couldn't string a sentence together. I realized that grammar is important, but it shouldn't be the main focus in the early stages. Speaking and listening should come first. Memorizing vocabulary without context. I tried to learn English by cramming hundreds of words from vocabulary lists. But when I needed to use those words in conversation, my mind went blank. I didn't know how to use them in real-life situations, so they were useless. Learning words in context through sentences, conversations, and stories is much more effective. Avoiding speaking. I was terrified of making mistakes, so I avoided speaking English altogether. I told myself, I'll start speaking when I'm ready. But the truth is, I was never going to feel ready unless I started practicing. The only way to become confident in speaking is to actually speak, translating everything in my head. Every time I wanted to say something, I translated it from my native language to English. This made me slow, unnatural, and hesitant. Native speakers don't think about grammar rules before speaking. They just speak. I needed to train myself to think in English. Relying too much on subtitles, I watched English movies and TV shows with subtitles in my native language, thinking I was learning. But I wasn't really listening to English. I was just reading in my own language. Switching to English subtitles, or no subtitles at all, made a huge difference in my listening skills. Studying passively instead of actively, I thought I was learning by watching English videos or reading books, but I wasn't engaging with the language. I wasn't speaking, writing, or thinking in English. I was just consuming content without using it. Active learning, practicing speaking, writing, and listening with intention accelerates progress, not setting clear goals. In the beginning, I didn't have a clear plan. I would study randomly without direction. Once I set specific goals, e.g., have a 5-minute conversation in English by next month, I started seeing real progress. Sound familiar? If you've been making these mistakes, don't worry, you're not alone. Many learners struggle with the same issues. The good news is that there's a better way to learn English, and I'm going to share it with you. What worked? The breakthrough. One day, I read about a new approach, learning English the way children learn their first language. Think about it. Babies don't start by memorizing grammar rules. They listen, absorb, and gradually start speaking. I decided to change my method completely. I realized that my previous approach, focusing too much on grammar and vocabulary lists, was holding me back. Instead, I needed to immerse myself in English and make it a natural part of my daily life. Just like a child learns a language by being surrounded by it every day, I needed to surround myself with English in a meaningful way. I asked myself, how can I make English a part of my world? That's when I started making small but powerful changes. I switched my phone and social media to English, started thinking in English, and made a rule to listen to English conversations whenever possible. I treated English not as a subject to study, but as a skill to develop. This shift in mindset changed everything. Learning English was no longer something I did for an exam or a job. It became part of who I was. And with that, my confidence and fluency started growing naturally. The first major change I made was to focus on listening as much as possible. I realized that before I could speak fluently, I needed to train my ears and brain to recognize English naturally. 1. Listening, listening, and more listening. Instead of spending hours on textbooks, I immersed myself in English. Every day, I listened to podcasts, watched TV shows, and played English music. At first, I didn't understand much, but over time, I started recognizing words, then phrases, and eventually entire sentences. I realized that the key to learning a language is exposure. Just like babies absorb their native language through listening, I needed to surround myself with English sounds as much as possible. I stopped worrying about understanding every word and focused on getting used to the rhythm and intonation of the language. My tips for effective listening: listen to things you enjoy, movies, interviews, audiobooks. Don't worry about understanding everything. Just let the sounds sink in. Repeat after native speakers. Mimic their pronunciation and rhythm. Use shadowing techniques. Listen to a sentence and repeat it immediately after the speaker. Watch videos with subtitles first, then re-watch them without subtitles to improve comprehension. Start with slower content, like children's stories or beginner-friendly podcasts, and gradually move to more complex material. One of my favorite activities was watching movies with subtitles. I watched Friends and How I Met Your Mother, pausing and repeating lines until I could say them naturally. Over time, I started understanding without subtitles. That was a magical moment. Another technique that worked well for me was listening while doing other activities. I played English audio while cooking, commuting, or even exercising. This passive exposure helped reinforce the language without feeling like studying. Over time, my brain started picking up patterns, and I noticed that I could understand spoken English more easily. The best part, I began recognizing common phrases and expressions that I later used in conversations without even thinking. Listening was the foundation of my English fluency, and the more I listened, the more confident I became in speaking. But listening alone wasn't enough. I had to train my brain to think in English to speed up my fluency. 2. Thinking in English. Stop translating in your head. This was one of the most powerful changes I made. I realized that constantly translating everything in my head was slowing me down. Instead of forming thoughts in my native language and then translating them into English, I started thinking directly in English. At first, this felt unnatural. I would catch myself mentally converting words before speaking, which made me slow and hesitant. But I knew that fluency required me to break free from this habit. I needed to train my brain to process English naturally, just like native speakers do. How I trained myself to think in English, describing my daily activities in English. For example, I'm brushing my teeth. I need to buy some groceries. Asking myself questions like, what should I eat for dinner? And answering them in English, narrating my day in my mind as if I were speaking to someone in English, labeling objects in my house with English words to reinforce vocabulary, writing short thoughts or diary entries in English every night before bed, using English-only resources for information instead of relying on translations, practicing self-talk. When alone, I would verbalize my thoughts in English, even if it was just saying, I need to grab my keys and leave for work. At first, it felt like I was forcing myself, but over time, something amazing happened. I started responding to situations in English without hesitation. My thoughts became faster, and I started forming sentences naturally without relying on translation. I remember the first time I dreamed in English. It was a huge milestone for me, proving that my brain had finally started thinking in English subconsciously. One of the best exercises I discovered was the 5-second rule. Whenever I saw something, I had 5 seconds to describe it in English without overthinking. For example, if I saw a dog, I would say, "That's a big fluffy dog. It looks playful." This simple habit helped me stop hesitating and build fluency faster. Thinking in English completely transformed the way I learned. It made me more confident, quicker in conversations, and less dependent on my native language. If you're still translating in your head, I encourage you to try these techniques. The sooner you train your brain, the sooner fluency will feel natural. 3. Speaking without fear. For years, I was afraid to speak because I didn't want to sound stupid. I worried about my pronunciation, grammar mistakes, and whether people would judge me. But then I realized making mistakes is part of learning. If I waited until I was perfect before speaking, I would never start. I had to push myself out of my comfort zone. I made a promise to myself, speak English every day, no matter what. Whether I was alone, with friends, or talking to strangers, I had to find ways to practice. How I practiced speaking. I recorded myself talking about my day and listened to my mistakes. I joined online language exchange programs to talk with native speakers. I spoke in front of a mirror to build confidence and observe my facial expressions. I repeated phrases from movies and podcasts to improve my pronunciation and intonation. I forced myself to use English in daily interactions, such as ordering food or asking for directions. I challenged myself to have full conversations in English without switching to my native language. I engaged in small talk with strangers, whether at a cafe or in a store, to get comfortable with real-world conversations. At first, it was nerve-wracking. I stumbled, I mispronounced words, and sometimes I felt embarrassed. But over time, I realized that most people didn't care if I made mistakes. They just appreciated that I was trying. A breakthrough moment happened when I ordered coffee in English for the first time. The words just flowed out of my mouth, and the barista understood me perfectly. That small victory gave me so much confidence. It showed me that I was capable of expressing myself in English, even if I wasn't perfect. Joining English-speaking groups. Another important step was joining English-speaking groups where I could talk freely. At first, I hesitated. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to keep up with the conversation, but over time, I became more comfortable. The key was not worrying about making mistakes. Instead, I focused on getting my point across. The more I spoke, the more natural it became. One thing that helped me tremendously was participating in discussion groups and debates. I would prepare for topics in advance, write down key phrases, and practice speaking out loud. This made me feel more prepared and less anxious when actually speaking. I also joined online communities where people practiced English together. These groups provided a safe space to make mistakes, ask questions, and receive constructive feedback. Speaking with people who were also learning English made me feel less pressured. We were all improving together. Another game changer was finding a language buddy, someone who was either a native speaker or another learner at my level. We set weekly goals and held each other accountable. Having someone to practice with regularly made a huge difference in my progress. One of my best experiences was attending English meetups and language exchange events in my city. These gatherings allowed me to practice real-life conversations in a relaxed, social setting. The more I participated, the more confident I became. I learned that fluency isn't about speaking perfectly, it's about communicating effectively. Joining English-speaking groups was a turning point in my learning journey. It gave me the chance to practice consistently, gain confidence, and connect with others on the same path. If you're serious about improving your speaking skills, I highly recommend finding a group or language partner to practice with. Embracing mistakes as learning opportunities. I also learned to embrace my mistakes instead of fearing them. Whenever I mispronounced a word or used the wrong grammar, instead of feeling embarrassed, I treated it as a learning opportunity. I would repeat the correct version to myself and move on. Over time, these small corrections added up, and my confidence skyrocketed. One of my biggest realizations was that fluency is not about speaking perfectly. It's about communicating effectively. The goal is to be understood, not to sound like a native speaker. Once I let go of my perfectionism, I started to enjoy speaking English instead of fearing it. Another breakthrough moment came when I stopped apologizing for my mistakes. Instead of saying, "Sorry for my bad English," I started saying, "I'm still learning and I appreciate your patience." This simple mindset shift made me feel more confident and allowed me to engage in conversations without self-doubt. I also made a habit of learning from my mistakes actively. Whenever I noticed a recurring grammar error or pronunciation issue, I would write it down, look up the correct way to say it, and practice using it in different sentences. This turned my weaknesses into strengths over time. The best part: once I stopped fearing mistakes, I became a much better speaker. I took more risks, spoke more frequently, and learned faster than ever before. I realized that every mistake was a step forward, not a setback. 4. Reading and writing to reinforce learning. Reading improved my vocabulary, while writing helped me organize my thoughts in English. I started small, reading short articles, writing a journal, and even posting in English on social media. The more I engaged with English through reading and writing, the more confident I became in expressing myself. I found that reading not only exposed me to new words, but also helped me understand how sentences were structured naturally. Writing, on the other hand, made me actively use what I learned, reinforcing my knowledge and helping me express myself more clearly. My daily practice, reading 10 pages of an English book to expand vocabulary and see grammar in context, writing a short journal entry in English to develop fluency in expressing thoughts, reading aloud to improve pronunciation and rhythm, summarizing what I read to boost comprehension and articulation, keeping a vocabulary notebook with example sentences for better retention, practicing shadow writing, copying text from books or articles by hand to internalize sentence structures, writing short stories and essays to develop creativity and complex sentence usage. At first, my writing was full of mistakes, but over time, I noticed a big improvement. The key was consistency, practicing a little bit every day. I didn't worry about making my writing perfect. Instead, I focused on getting my ideas down in English. One of the most effective techniques I used was shadow writing, copying text from books or articles by hand. This helped me internalize sentence structures and improve my grammar naturally. I also started writing short stories in English, which made learning more fun and engaging. By writing creatively, I could experiment with new vocabulary and different ways of expressing myself. I remember the first time I wrote a long post in English on social media. I was nervous, but the positive feedback from friends encouraged me to keep going. The more I wrote, the more confident I became in expressing myself. Eventually, writing in English became second nature to me. Another great habit I developed was reading different types of materials, news articles, fiction, self-improvement books, and even English blogs. Each genre introduced me to different tones, writing styles, and vocabulary, which enriched my understanding of the language. By combining reading and writing into my daily routine, I developed a strong foundation in English that complemented my speaking and listening skills. These habits made a huge difference in my fluency over time. The results: fluency and confidence. After a year of daily practice, something incredible happened. I stopped thinking about English as a foreign language. It became part of my daily life. I could hold conversations without translating in my head. I no longer feared speaking with foreigners. English opened doors to new friendships, job opportunities, and experiences I never imagined. One of the proudest moments of my journey was when I delivered a presentation in English at work. A few years ago, I would have panicked, but on that day, I spoke with confidence, and my colleagues were impressed. That's when I knew I had truly mastered English. Beyond work, English allowed me to connect with people from all over the world. I made friends from different countries. engaged in meaningful conversations, and even traveled with more ease. I no longer felt like an outsider in English-speaking environments. I felt like I belonged. Another defining moment was when I started thinking and dreaming in English effortlessly. It was a sign that English had become second nature to me. No longer did I struggle to find words or worry about making mistakes. I embraced the language, and in return, it gave me confidence and opportunities I had never imagined. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were days when I felt stuck, days when I doubted my progress, and moments when I felt like giving up. But each time, I reminded myself why I started. I looked back at how far I had come, and that kept me going. I remember the first time I had a long conversation with a native English speaker without hesitating. It was during a trip abroad, and I found myself chatting effortlessly with a local. The feeling of accomplishment was indescribable. It was in that moment that I realized English was no longer just a skill. It had become a part of who I was. Even small victories, like successfully understanding a joke in English or effortlessly reading a book without a dictionary, reinforced my belief that fluency is achievable. These milestones, no matter how small, built up over time and made me more confident. Looking back, I can say that learning English was one of the most rewarding journeys of my life. It didn't just improve my communication skills, it changed me as a person. It made me more open-minded, more curious about the world, and more willing to step outside my comfort zone. My advice to you: start today. If you're struggling with English, don't give up. Here's my best advice. Make English a daily habit. Even 15 minutes a day can make a big difference. Surround yourself with English. Listen, speak, read, and write every day. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are proof that you're learning. Find methods that work for you. Have fun with learning. Celebrate small wins. Each step forward, no matter how small, brings you closer to fluency. Stay patient and persistent. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. Engage with native content. Watch movies, read books, and listen to podcasts in English to immerse yourself. Practice speaking every day. Even if you're alone, talk to yourself, record your voice, or find a language partner. What step will you take today? Share in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment for more tips on learning English.